Today was an event that culminated a year-long pilot project to implement complete streets in Baton Rouge.
It is a community issue because if you make streets safe for the older members of the family, then you've made them safe for everybody.
Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Ryan Benton with Center for Planning Excellence, and I'd like to welcome you again to the 2017 Louisiana Smart Growth Summit, and to this session in particular from Entergy to Electric Depot. Today we'll hear about a much anticipated adaptive reuse project which will transform the currently vacant Entergy site on Government Street into a vibrant hub of activity linking downtown, where we are now, in Mid-City. I happen to live a few blocks from the Entergy site, so I'm particularly excited about it, but that's aside. So we have three members of the project team here today to tell us about what has gone into making this project happen, including design, legal challenges, financing, tax credits, and other aspects of this complex project. A few things to note before I introduce our speakers. First of all, we'd like to thank the Capital Area Finance Authority for sponsoring this session. This session has been approved for continuing legal education. To receive CLE credit, return your completed forms, which Haley has here. If you need a form, raise your hand and she'll get you one. Be sure to turn these back in at the end of the session as you leave the theater. And believe I think Haley will be at the door collecting them. So our three speakers today. The first, we have Gwen Hamilton. She's the president and CEO of the East Baton Rouge Redevelopment Authority. Gwen has a long and deep commitment of service to the Baton Rouge community. Her bio is really long, but I'll sum it up. Prior to joining the RDA, she served in a number of leadership roles, including with New Schools for Baton Rouge, the Office of the Mayor President, Baton Rouge Area Chamber, Plan Baton Rouge and BRAF, and the list goes on and on and on. We also have Amanda Spain-Wells with Baker Donelson Law Firm. Amanda is an attorney whose practice focuses on real estate financing and affordable housing. Following Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, she worked closely with public and private entities to create and implement a now HUD-recommended program for the use of public funds for affordable housing. Amanda also works with drafting land use restrictions and regulations for new real estate developments throughout the state, including traditional neighborhood developments. We also have Dyke Nelson, founder and lead designer of DNA Workshop. Dyke is an architect, and he has experience with numerous projects at all scales, from historic renovations to mixed-use buildings, and he's become one of this region's leaders in sustainability. He's also engaged in the community. He serves on a number of boards and organizations, the Baton Rouge Area Red Cross, Hilltop Arboretum, and the Arts Council. So these three are really committed to this community, and they have a wealth of knowledge, and I'd like to welcome them.
So thank you, and obviously my history is a lot longer, and I'm double the age of these two, so they will catch up at some point. Thank you for joining us. This is, in case you want to tweet or whatever, however you say that, this is the most exciting session of the conference. So if your friends are not here, you might want to ask them to get over quickly. I want to first acknowledge that this is and has been a most exciting project that would not have come to fruition without the key word of partnership. And there are a number of individuals that I see here today who have played a vital role in bringing this to fruition. Partnerships in any endeavor that you engage are extremely important because there's no one entity that can pull off, if you will, a project as large as this one. So I want to thank all of the partners who are here in the room who helped the Redevelopment Authority get to this point. I was very fortunate when I came into the RDA on December 1st of 2014. A lot of the history and background work had already been accomplished. The importance of that became very, very clear. Also, the pressure of carrying forward on the work done by the previous administration was also very obvious. It said, Gwen, you had better get moving as quickly as possible. But nothing ever moves quickly that comes to quality fruition. In 2012, the Redevelopment Authority began working with Entergy to acquire the 6-acre Entergy site. It had been operated for a number of years as the Baton Rouge Electric Light Company from 1916 to 1940. It was a substation until the 1970s. Personally, I remember when my dad worked there in the early 60s as a laborer. And I remember the Christmas parties. Entergy used the site for its business offices until 2011. And there it sat. What you see is blighted property in the prime area of Baton Rouge. The robust redevelopment of downtown was quickly and is quickly moving eastward. And as you crossed the railroad track, the first thing you saw was this building. Okay, was this building.
Sorry, it's all me. Sorry.
Broken windows, fencing down. Obviously, if you look at the building, and Dyke will go into more detail, it did have some potential that Mr. Mansour and his staff and others saw that was worth preserving. But more importantly, what symbol or sign did it send to the members of our community? And what symbol and sign did it send, you can go to the next one,
Yes, ma'am.
to the area contiguous to that property? And you can see where it's located, and we have always believed that this property would indeed be a catalyst for continued development in the downtown area and eastward of downtown for as far as you can go. Site due diligence started in 2012 with phase 1 and phase 2 environmental assessments. This is required before that you can move forward. These assessments were done and there was no action item required. In the legal services, which Amanda will talk about in more detail, we proceeded, or the RDA proceeded, to enter into a donation agreement. We also had to have a property appraisal done. And at that time, the property appraised at about $1.6 million. In 2013, the property was donated through our property donation program into the Redevelopment Authority with the desire to remediate and redevelop the site in accordance with future BR. And I say that in accordance with future BR because we are one of the few cities in the country that has a roadmap for development and how we should proceed. I get calls periodically from other cities and they ask, how did you do that? It's because of partnerships with our mayor's office, with our city council, with private and other governmental entities, that we have a master plan that was recently updated that guides our development. Our plan was to create mixed use and green space that promotes walking, biking, and then opportunities for future development. Just recently, we entered into an agreement for rail station planning, and we'll talk about that in another session. Once we took possession of this beautiful blighted building, Then it became the RDA's responsibility to secure the property, to insure the property, and to maintain the property. After all, it was to fight blight, so we could not now be the slumlords of our parish. And we've continued to do that until Mr. Nelson's firm came on board. We did have to hire engineering services so that we could have land title surveys, site maps, and reports on other site issues that we would have to resolve before we could move to future construction. There was a little bit of site cleanup that was necessary. We received a grant through the Department of Environmental Quality, and we used that grant to remediate the building in terms of removing lead, mold, asbestos, and any other debris that existed, so that when we got to the appropriate point, we would have a truly developable site. In 2014, we also received a grant from the State Office of Community Development, which allowed us to complete a pre-development plan. The purpose of that plan was to demonstrate to the community what the possibility was. What is it that we could put in the heart of our city that would indeed be iconic and catalytic to the rest of the development that is to follow here in Baton Rouge. The pre-development strategies included quite a bit of market analysis. We had several design charrettes and community meetings. We did property assessments and worked with merchants and the Mid-City Redevelopment Alliance to make sure that the plans that were being developed folded nicely into the work that was already happening along the Government Street corridor and beyond. In 2015, the RDA engaged Fragonisi and Associates to assist in what was called a RFEI. This has truly been a learning journey for me. Request for expressions of interest to hire a developer for the site and to assist in the negotiations of the development agreement of the team selected. We received 8 proposals, 8 very good proposals. We had a very diverse selection team with very specific criteria for selection. That team shortlisted 3, and those 3 presented to the Board of Directors, and the final award was made to Weinstein Nelson for their electric depot proposal. In 2016, we entered into an exclusive negotiating agreement with Weinstein Nelson, and then the final development agreement was executed. The RDA maintains, through a 50-year land use, the ownership of the property, so we're connected for life.
Thank goodness.
Amanda?
Okay, so I'll jump in there and go into exactly what those documents talked about. So all you listening for CLE purposes, this is for you. So what the RDA Board of Commissioners was focused on when they acquired this property, and also when they acquired the property at Ardendale, which will be the next property that the RDA starts to develop, was they wanted to take the plans that the community had put together, the one that the OCD had helped to fund. They wanted to take all of the community input and make sure that whoever developed that property was held accountable to deliver on those ideas. And so when we looked at the 7 proposals that came through, it was very clear, I think, when we picked Dyke that we wanted to pick somebody who was already engaged in the neighborhood, was already connected to the community in a way that we knew that we could hold him accountable, and he was already being held accountable by the community because he actually works right across from the site. So when we entered into the long-term lease arrangement, Normally, when you see a ground lease, it's for 99 years. It's basically giving them the property, and they can do whatever they want, and your recourse against them is generally pretty limited from a legal standpoint. Our RDA board did not want that kind of standoff approach, so we entered into a 50-year ground lease. It does have some options to renew, but at that point, we've got a little bit more control, and we have some very, very specific default remedies that if the project does not deliver on what we have promised the community and what the developer has promised the RDA, we do have the ability to step in and take the property back with a pretty, legally easy way through a ground lease. Generally, when you see a public-private partnership, you have a CEA, but the land is actually transferred to the developers. And so under a CEA, a cooperative endeavor agreement approach, you never really have the ability to reach in and take the land back in an easy legal way. You're generally trying to enforce remedies under a cooperative endeavor agreement that usually provides for other remedies as opposed to a retransfer of the land. It's either a monetary remedy or some sort of injunctive relief as opposed to taking the property back. And the RDA board did not want a cooperative endeavor structure for the property. So we have a 50-year ground lease that does have monthly payments. It has a construction term, which we are almost done with. And so commencing next year in June, the electric depot will start paying rent payments, monthly rent payments to the RDA. That was another key difference that the Board of Commissioners wanted to make sure that we had in the structure. For those of you who are local and read the paper, the RDA is not exactly a cash cow. So they needed some sort of income coming back to the RDA so that we could keep doing this in the future. One of the things that the RDA was very specific about from a legal standpoint is we are not going to take on the Entergy building, which at the time was, it had some environmental issues, it's clearly blight. Entergy donated it to the RDA basically so that the RDA could clean it up and it wasn't necessarily Entergy's problem anymore. And so the board said, we don't want to take this property, clean it up, and then give it away and not have some sort of return on investment for what the RDA is putting into it, not only on applying for these grants and using the public dollars, but in also making sure that the project is long-term viable and something that the community is proud of. So they will start paying monthly ground lease payments. Those payments are based on the appraised value of the property. Like we started with, the appraised value when we acquired the property was about $1.6 million. So those ground lease payments will adjust every 5 years based on the current appraised value of the property. We will receive, I think it's a 7% of the appraised value during a lease term during the year. So he'll pay 1/12 of 7% of the current appraised value per month. And then also once the project is actually developed, we have an additional ground lease payment that will come in when the property is actually operating. And once the initial investors have made their return, we've given them a percentage of a return on their investment. And then once that is paid, then we will receive a percentage of the net profits of the project going forward through the rest of the lease term. And so I think that's at 15% of the net profits. When we talked about it, and the great thing about working with Dyke has been that it really is a partnership. It was not a difficult negotiation, but from a public side, we can tell the public that we are actually going to be incentivizing the developer, to make the project work, but also sharing in the success of the project when it does work. And so we'll be able to look back at Electric Depot and say, not only was this a great initial project for the RDA of this scale, but it will continue to feed projects that the RDA can support for the next 50 years through the way that we structured the lease payments. That's good.
Good?
Yeah.
All right, well, I'm not really sure I knew that's what all those things said, but good
Sorry.
for us. All right, I'm going to get up and move so that everybody doesn't fall asleep, and my part of the presentation goes a little bit longer, so let me... All right, so my name is Dyke Nelson. I am an architect. I do development on the side as a hobby. And so we got involved in this project. I moved my office to this neighborhood about 5 years ago. We really enjoyed getting entrenched into the neighborhood. It's a great area. We've got, it's the intersection of Baton Rouge, right? It's where everybody comes together culturally, everybody comes together socioeconomically, racially, everything else. The infrastructure is there. It's just a tremendous resource within our community that's, seen better times. And so what we did when we approached the project was, and after having looked at it for 4 years before we put the proposal in, we found friends and neighbors and partners, like Gwen was talking about, that's such an important part of this, that would have the same interests that we did in developing the property, and that they had skin in the game, so to speak. And so we had groups like Shiloh Baptist Foundation that's a block away that's invested, and all these people were putting hard dollars into the project, right? So we got Helena Cunningham, we've got Anthony Kimball, we've got Garrett Temple, we've got Matt Siraj, David Weinstein, my partner, and then Todd Stevens, who are all interested parties that are invested in this community in a big way, that want to see more than just a monetary return on this investment. And so that was a key to our moving forward, and then also our partnership with the RDA and our ability to deliver, and our track record of being able to deliver in the past, that I think was part of what helped us to get to this point. The other thing that was very important to us is the ability to impact not just this one catalyst site, but also the other pieces of the neighborhood as we go. So we're bringing everything up together, giving people a hand up where they need it, developing blighted properties where we can. And so there were other areas within the community that we're targeting, as well as developing along with this. So that was another key component to what we're trying to do. The way that we're doing this is obviously with real dollars, right? So we're putting cash into the deal. We're also leveraging as many incentives as possible. And what we're doing, which is possibly unlike some other developers, is that we're leveraging all of those different incentives to increase the quality of the project for a long-term investment. These incentives are being used for that purpose rather than trying to pull a lot of cash dollars out on the front end. We're more interested in getting that return over a longer period of time. And so you can see we're using federal and state historic credits. By the way, write your senator today. Make sure that they preserve the federal tax credit. It's a huge deal for this state in particular. We're using enterprise zone restoration tax abatement. We're using incentives from the state in that regard. We'll be doing a very energy efficient program, so we'll be using 179D deduction for that. And also we're looking into renewable credits, and then also other credits and things that have to do, or loan programs that have to do with residential for the second phase, which I'll get into in a second. So the history of this building is pretty cool. Gwen got into it a little bit, but I mean, this basically powered Baton Rouge. I mean, it really was the electric center of Baton Rouge. I like this one where it says, they didn't really like it at first. They're like, let's just go back to candles. We don't need this electricity stuff. But that's a picture of the original building back in the day. Just to give a little bit of context, this is kind of some of the articles. These were some folks that worked at the facility. And getting into the community, all right? So the one thing that's great about this site in particular is that it truly is, although it may not be the geographic center of Baton Rouge, it truly is the heart of Baton Rouge. The connectivity to this site through multiple modes of transportation, bike, bus, car, everything else is tremendous. This just shows a little bit about the connectivity that's there, and we're going to continue to try to promote that and try to continue to connect the rest of the city to this site. Now getting into the specific project. The project that we proposed and that we were awarded to do on the project, that we have very strict rules to stay within, was to do a mixed-use project. In our development experience, it really is important to us. We feel like the diversity of income, the ability to energize a site, things like that are very important. Rather than keeping just one type of building on the site, we felt like it really needed to be a mixed-use project. And so to that end, what we're doing is we're approaching this in 2 phases. So the first phase is to deal with the historic buildings, get those renovated back into commerce, keep them from being blighted anymore, and then roll into a second phase, which would include additional residential buildings. So in phase 1, which is essentially this outline right here, and I'll show you the full site plan on that in a minute, that's where we're doing the renovation of the historic buildings. And then phase 2, we anticipate doing a lot more residential. We anticipate a minimum of 120 more residential apartments on the site. We don't know exactly how that's going to be, but that's going to be a product of the market and how phase 1 comes off. So here's a little bit of the beginning stages of how the site plan and everything of phase 1 came together, and then this shows the buildings on phase 1. So we have building A here. which I'll get into the makeup of that in a minute. That's a 3-story building. That's really truly what everybody sees as being the Entergy site. We've got building B right here, which is a 2-story building, about 30,000 square feet. It's got nice bones as well. We've got this small building in the back, which is also historic. It was a garage, building D. And building C, which fronts Government Street. It's not a contributing element to Entergy site per se, but it's still a historic building that has access to historic tax credits. So going forward, the idea is to kind of emulate and bring back the history of the site to show that it was an Entergy site, and then also use some of the artifacts that are on the site to further revitalize the site. So bringing in some more landscaping, using some of those elements. And this is building A. So building A is our kind of key building. We've got one tenant that's going to take the entire building. That building is got some tremendous spaces in it, and so what this will be is an entertainment center, very similar to like a Pinewood Social in Nashville, some of the things in the Funk Zone in Santa Barbara. We've looked at a lot of different precedents for this. Essentially what it will be is an entertainment center for families, for people of all types. It will have live music, it'll have bowling, it'll have restaurants, so it'll be a really vibrant site. It's 30,000 square feet, so the first floor you'll have your live music and restaurant. The second floor will be bowling, and then the third floor will be bowling as well, but it'll also be a private room, VIP area with overviews into the plaza. This shows a little bit. On the second floor we'll have some private rooms for parties, things like that for kids. And this is the upstairs, the really nice high-end VIP room where we have the outlook onto the outside spaces. So we're really excited about this tenant coming in. This is our main plaza in the middle. We've got a large space between the buildings, so we're going to try to utilize that for public events. We can possibly house farmers market, arts market, things like that in this space. We're going to program it. We're going to have music in that space, and so we're really excited to have this because we think it's a really important part of the project. This is building B. So building B, the first floor is going to be retail space. The second floor is going to be apartments. We're going to have 16 apartments in this, and we're going to have a full service retail space down here. We're anticipating a restaurant in this back area. We're still working on the tenants on this space, but we have a lot of really good leads right now, and we assume once we start construction that'll really pick up. This just gives you an indication of what some of those spaces might look like in building B. Building C, we've got a tenant that's going to go in there, is going to have a healthy living concept. They're going to do healthy foods along with exercise in the space. It gives you a little indication of what it looks like on the inside. So that's the building closest to Government Street. And then building D is going to be a brew pub, pizzeria type space to kind of bring an eclectic, kind of funky feeling to that space. We'll have the indoor space, but also a lot of outdoor space just spills out onto that main plaza. Here again, you're seeing some of that outdoor space activated with bocce courts, things like that, to really activate it for people that are much younger than me. So hopefully that'll be successful. And then where we are with the project right now is that we've gone from kind of the architecture of the project to the overview and how this connects with the community, both from a physical standpoint as well as interactively online, things like that. And so we started looking at the branding of the project, so to speak. And so this is just a quick snippet of kind of what our vision is for the site. We think it's really important in terms of what it brings to the community. And then this is our alternate logo. This is not the main logo that we've come up with to represent. We think it does a really good job of kind of representing the history of the site. I didn't really say at the beginning because I feel like it's a little bit obvious, but the reason why it's called Electric Depot is just to, again, recognize the history of the site, that this was a historic location across the railroad tracks of where the passenger rail was for the city. We have the electric, generation for the entire city, so all those things are tied in with what we're trying to accomplish with the project. And our mission is to provide cultural experience and to celebrate the community. And so to do that, this is our final logo for the property. You can go visit our website at theelectricdepot.com to kind of see a little bit more about it, and there'll be more announcements, things like that coming in the near future. And we feel like it's really important that the tagline that we have is out there. It's where the city meets. I mean, the idea is that we bring all these different types of people together in this one place that's vibrant, that is a catalyst project that helps to improve the rest of the neighborhood around it, but also acknowledges the rest of the neighborhood around it without pushing anybody to the side. And I think that the idea of using these historic buildings and not tearing them down and not coming in with something brand new really helps us to keep within that context of the community, and something that we feel like is very important to what we're doing. So where we are with the project right now is that we received, very excited that we finally got notification that our permits are available last Friday. As soon as the contractor wants to go pick them up, they're there and available. And so we anticipate starting construction imminently, just as soon as we get the last little bit of the financing cleaned up and when the banks cut us loose to go. So that's a really exciting piece of it. So that'll start our phase 1 construction. I can say unequivocally that we'll be complete with the 4 historic buildings, and phase 1 will be done in December of 2018 or prior. It will not go into 2019, so that will be done next year, which we're excited to say that. And then phase 2 will begin the planning of that right now to get that where it starts construction around the middle of next year, toward the end of next year, so that we're rolling on with those additional residential units and things like that. What our anticipation is, we'll have additional commercial and office tenants that approach us about finding space, and then we'll be able to create those things as a part of our phase 2 project. And so ultimately what we're planning to do is phase 1, we're going to invest somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 to $12 million. Same thing for phase 2, if not more, depending on the amount of tenants we can get into the space. So we're making a significant contribution to this site, and that wouldn't be possible if not for the work that the RDA has done to get this site to where it is, the incredible relationship that we've been able to have, and just being reasonable and figuring these things out and being creative in how we approach these things so that everybody's interests are represented. And I think that one of the things that really kind of helped that to work out was the fact that nobody brought a lot of ego to the table, right? We all came with the same purpose in mind, and the details of how that happened, we were able to work around certain things that may have been better or worse for one of the other groups to collaboratively come up with a plan that we feel like is really going to impact our community in a really positive way well into the future, and not just for Mid-City, not just for this one site, but also for the community as a whole. Because when you create a facility like this, the research that I've done on other places like Pinewood Social, like the Funk Zone, like these other places in other communities, they become a real draw. And so when the new tourists, the new people that are coming to a community, the new young people that are trying to come to a community are looking for an experience like this. They're looking for something that represents the city that they're in more so than just a generic kind of play space or restaurant or things like that. And so we're trying to be very careful in the way that we craft this from a design standpoint, and the way that we craft it from a tenant standpoint, and the way we approach it from a developer standpoint, in that, again, it needs to be financially viable. There's no doubt about that. It needs to be financially viable for us. It needs to be financially viable for the RDA. But we do have that added benefit of it's our neighborhood. My office, I look out my window and can see this site every day. The other investors in this, they ride by it every day. We're all very interested in what happens to this, and also the remainder of the community around us. And so it really puts us in a great position to be a part of something that, I couldn't be more excited about it. Hopefully that's coming through, because, we really are, and I'm really proud of our team. I'm proud of the folks that have come to the table and put real dollars into something that, quite honestly, until it gets accomplished, it is a bit of a risk. But we're fully confident that, I think Baton Rouge is ready for this. I think that, we're certainly ready to deliver it. And, come see us for New Year's of 2018, and we'll have a good time. So, and I think we're going to take questions now. Is that the? Yeah.
Great, thank you. So we do have a good bit of time for questions. I want to start off, I've got a few things. So we mentioned that future maybe potential rail as a part of this. How does that fit into the planning process? Is it a part of the actual site, or would it be separate, or how does that work?
So when the RDA approaches any redevelopment activity, you not only look at the site specific, you look at everything that is contiguous to that site. In this instance, again, because of partnerships, very important partnerships like the Baton Rouge Area Foundation and others, we also simultaneously identified the potential for a rail station very near this site. If not for the track, you could say contiguous to the site. We applied, the Redevelopment Authority applied to the Federal Rail Commission for a grant through a very competitive process. I say competitive process. The grant was for applicants along the existing rail. We received that grant, which was a very arduous process, which is the word, and thanks to Tara Titone, we were successful recipients of that grant and entered just recently into a contract with HNTB to do the design of the rail station. Work is already underway at several station areas along the way. Ascension and I believe St. James is also underway. Again, this is an opportunity to have these two projects build into a larger project. The ideas for the rail station are not just to be a stop to throw your bag on. What we asked the proposers to do was to create another destination and approach from a multimodal perspective. So we're looking for the results from that in about a year to complement the work that's being done at Electric Depot.
Thank you.
And I can just mention as a current property owner in that general vicinity and just a resident of Baton Rouge, the idea of being able to have this connectivity and to have this other opportunity to avoid traffic is very exciting for us in general. I think it's going to be, I think it could be great if we can kind of put it across the finish line.
Great. All right. If you have a question, Haley here will bring a microphone to you so we can all hear you.
If you guys don't have any questions, I'm just going to keep talking because I finished a little bit early, so you better start asking questions.
Can you hear me? So how did the Government Street plan fit into your thoughts and your design and your consideration? I guess the question is, was it considered, and how does it work with the overall development?
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, I think it's a critical element to the whole development and was certainly a part of our consideration in attempting the project. I think it's going to be a tremendous benefit for Baton Rouge in general to make Government Street safer and more travel friendly for pedestrians and things like that is a huge step in the right direction. And then a part of our design, we've been lockstep in talking with DOTD and Stantec as they've done that design and talked to them about not just the overlay that they're doing now, which we're very excited about and it's going to make a tremendous impact, as I've already said, but also what happens day two, right? Because the approach that DOTD is taking is great, is that they're doing the road diet, they're going to deliver a certain package of things that are going to make the road better, but it's going to be incumbent upon us as private business owners and the city to come on behind that and layer in all the important elements that are going to make it that much more special. We've been asked numerous times about, is this going to be comparable to Magazine Street? Is this, all those kind of things in New Orleans? And what I've always said, and I feel very strongly on this, is that we actually are planning this, and so we have the opportunity to make it better than what Magazine Street is, in that we can do, we can provide for certain elements for parking, we can make it more attractive, we can, provide additional landscaping and things like that. And so we're working, again, through what Gwen was talking about, through different partnerships with not just our team, with the RDA, with the city, with Mid-City Merchants, with Mid-City Redevelopment Authority, with the Downtown Development District, to really look at all those things and see where those dollars are available to be able to apply those things after the fact, right? Because we're going to get a phase one of that, but we all need to be thinking about what happens in phase two, and we need to be willing partners to get in there and add those layers of attractiveness that are important to make it a real destination. And we certainly have accommodations for that on our particular site, but we're looking at that globally all up and down Government Street.
And in our request for proposals, we required that the responders demonstrate that they had connected with, understood existing plans that were underway. As a result, and Dyke mentioned, we have formed a work group, a Mid-City Government Street work group with all the partners, and we meet bi-monthly to bring update on each of the projects that are happening in and along Government Street and identifying those areas where we need to partner, particularly as it relates to the government entities.
I see you've got some on-site parking. How does that compare to existing code requirements and even tenant requirements for council?
Yeah, so our on-site parking is driven by both. Obviously, it needs to be viable from a commercial standpoint, but also has to be complicit with zoning. We are not asking for any waivers. We're fully code compliant with the amount of parking that we have. We actually have a lot more parking than is required. We're using we're using parking lots on either side of the site, though, to keep the bulk of the site pedestrian friendly. And so there's not going to be regular traffic going through the site, but on either side, kind of a dumbbell configuration, we'll have several hundred parking spots on either side. And so, you know, we feel like that, you know, the code is generous in terms of how kind of a more urban site like this is approached, and I think that's an appropriate response. But then again, we also have to be very cognizant on the developer, when I put my developer hat on, that we are providing enough parking so that tenants it's very attractive to them, that they're very comfortable, that they're going to have plenty of places for people to park. And so my thought right now is that for what we're planning, we certainly have sufficient parking, but that is always a consideration. And then going forward, we're going to be looking for doing additional infrastructure pieces to allow for some additional on-street parking, other things to up that, but while still keeping the quality of the neighborhood while we're doing it.
In this project, the Planning Commission has worked side by side with us. This project is a little bit different in an inner city location, so it also will serve to inform where there need to be code changes that would fit in with the urban design. And Mr. Duke and his team have been very open to looking at that so that as they make changes, they can make them appropriately.
As a developer, especially in a dense area, it's always assumable that the folks, the residents there, don't want blight, yet they often talk out of the other sides of their mouth when they don't want it in their backyard either, right? The fear of the unknown, the fear of the new traffic, the fear of the noise, the fear of whatever is out there that's not there now. In your entitlement process, how did you deal with the neighborhood groups and the residents to ease their fears in that regard?
Sure. So the first off, RDA has been abundantly communicative with the community throughout this entire process. So I start out at a pretty good position of them having communicated throughout this whole process. I hate to I was looking for another word. I could go well into them anyway. So we plan to do the same thing as a development team. And yes, I mean, you're always, if everybody is really excited and is behind what you're doing, then you're doing something wrong. You're going to have naysayers no matter what you do, right? And so what we're trying to do is communicate what we're doing, make sure that people are aware of that. We're actually having another public meeting on November 14th at 6:30 at Shiloh Baptist Church, which is right there next to the site, to talk to the neighbors again, let them know what we're doing, let them ask questions of us and see what they have to say. And you know, we got to move forward with the project in the way that's been contemplated, and it's got to make sense. But in the same regard, our intention is to bring everybody along with us, to provide not just you know, the eye candy, so to speak, but also to provide opportunities for employment. I mean, this site is going to generate numerous jobs. I'd love to have, you know, most of the people that work here to be able to walk to work, you know, from their house right around that neighborhood. And certainly we are trying to impact that in a very positive way. And so and I think the key to it, same as anything, is to be just kind of, you know, very direct communication. And I think that, you know, again, we're going to try to make sure that we're being honest with everything we do. I tend to put all my cards on the table really early, probably to my detriment, but you know, that's the key to it. Really, is just communicating.
I have a question. Look, this is a great plan, a great opportunity, but it brings to mind something that happened in the early 80s when the Catfish Town was developed with a lot of potential, a lot of initial success, and then it flourished for several years, and then it tapered off, and I guess the casino had to come in and rescue it. Now it's viable again, but not what it was originally intended to be. So I guess my question is, what plans are you going to have to make this sustainable and not just a flash in the pan? Everybody wants to come here, you know, for a couple of years, and then it dies off, and you know, and doesn't maintain itself as a entertainment center and a place where people really want to go. You know, that's what happened to Catfish Town. It was great initially, and then it tapered off into what it is now.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that there's always a risk of that, right? With any kind of development, it could always, you know, peter out and be, you know, back in a bad position. But our approach is to really be thoughtful in the way that we design it for a long term. I mean, every development that we've done, we've tried to look at it as a long-term investment and try to be thoughtful in the way that we approach tenants, the way that we approach leasing structures, for instance. One way to do that is to make sure that you've got a graduated lease structure so that that tenant is successful, that your project is more successful, but it also gives them some latitude to build in some backup so that they can weather the harder times and deal with those kind of things. You know, certainly I know that Catfish Town had some historic buildings associated with it, but I think that what we're trying to do from an approach standpoint is really to take these high quality buildings and breathe life back into them and have them last for another 100 years. And I think that we will benefit tremendously from our location as well. The amount of traffic and things that go past there, our ability to capture that from a visibility standpoint, because, you know, that is one big contrast from Catfish Town, is that it's a little bit further off the beaten path versus being kind of in your face every day. But it's certainly something that we are cognizant of and are trying to be thoughtful about in the way that we approach it. We're trying to make sure that our tenants have skin in the game too, and that they're putting some dollars up so that they're invested in making sure that it's successful long term as well. And those are all tools that most developers will use. But, you know, it is good, and we have done a lot of research, and we'll continue to do research on other facilities, both successful and not successful, to make sure that we're at least learning from other people's, you know, successes and mistakes to try to make sure that happens. Hope that answers your question.
And I think also Catfish Town was a little ahead of its time for the downtown area. There was no one there after 5 o'clock. There was no one working down there. You know, if you put Catfish Town downtown, one, you probably couldn't afford it because the property values have gone through the roof. You know, since the governor moved all of the state office buildings down there and you have such a thriving community down here, Catfish Town would be a whole different scenario. And if you look at the Government Street corridor and the small businesses that are opening up there and the mid-city merchants and the life that is in this area, I don't know that you're going to have a repeat. I do think, obviously, every mixed-use development has a turnover where certain concepts just don't work after a 10-year lease period, and so you're looking for a new concept. But as a whole, I think this site and how connected it is to the community already is not going to go dark after 15 years or less like Catfish Town did. I just don't think in the area that it's in that you're going to run that risk. But that is something that the Redevelopment Authority is going in and looking at for future projects, because it wants to find those dark spaces in our communities where, you know, if you reconcept it and put in a little bit of effort, where you can really create lively hubs throughout our communities where you have dark spaces like Catfish Town turned into for so many years.
And I think two more other quick comments on that. One is that hopefully our team was selected for this project so that we don't do that, you know, in terms of how we approach it. But the other thing is that I've been really excited, and something that Amanda said reminded me of this, is that there's so many young developers that are taking on these smaller projects all up and down Government Street, all around this area that we're looking for. And people approach me every day asking for an opportunity there to where we can, you know, the community around us is coming up at the same time, so it's not a standalone, isolated piece. It is a catalyst project, but it's not a standalone catalyst project, which I'm really excited about. And the other thing that I mentioned earlier is that that diversity of income, having residential and retail and potentially office, all those things working together, I think is something that helps to guard against those kind of things so that we can work through and have those different tenants, moving through. And we have, if the residential is doing really well and some of the commercial drops off or vice versa, we can actually balance those things out. And that's how we like to do development. So hopefully that'll help with it as well.
Hey, in your phase 2 residential development, do you anticipate being able to include some percentage of affordable housing?
What's the question?
The question is about the phase 2 affordable housing piece.
I'll take it.
Sure. It was required, so he better have it in there.
It was required, but we were also very fortunate because when you look at the area and identify what's already there, within 1 block of this new development is a 100% affordable development through the Louisiana Housing Corporation. A very beautiful development. They're excited to see this as a partnership to continue to create mixed income, because with this development, we're eliminating blight and adding to the value of the existing affordable housing in that geographic area.
Just as a general practice, we try to work in some percentage of affordable housing in pretty much all the developments that we do. And that was something that we approached before that even became a requirement as a part of this. We were planning to do that anyway. And so that's kind of a very easy approach. If you're kind of anticipating doing that on everything from the beginning, it makes it very easy to work those things in. And just right. And a quick story is that I don't know if you remember this, Gwen, but there was a public meeting at Shiloh Baptist, and one of the members of the community stands up and asks, well, what about affordable housing on this site? And the gentleman that was giving the presentation at the time says, well, how much can you afford? And they say, well, it's $500, $600 a month, what have you. And I got a little warm feeling in my heart, because I was like, well, I got a building downtown Baton Rouge that I've got 3 or 4 apartments that cost exactly that, and we'll be able to apply this if you leverage the incentives that are there the right way. It allows you to be able to provide that in a way that is. And it's interesting, too, because our approach to it is to do a self-inflicted, affordable approach, and there may or may not be incentives available with that. So typically we put about 15% affordable housing into the developments that we do, and then that way you get a diversity of income inside those developments. And so that's what we are planning to do on this project as well. And then we'll see if that ties into any kind of incentive package in addition to kind of what we're already doing, but that's certainly something we are going to do.
And the RDA also controls probably 24 adjudicated properties within the 2-block area of the site. And we've already talked to Dyke and some other developers about taking those adjudicated properties and turning them into single-family affordable units as well, so that we will be creating a diversity of housing options all right there within that 2-block radius.
And the other thing I'll mention on that is that it's not necessarily altruistic that we're doing that. Just to be honest, as a developer, is that I feel like, and that we as developers feel like, that it is important to have a diversity of income. And one of the things with this project and with this neighborhood, and the things that we're trying to do in this neighborhood, is that we feel like it's very attractive in the way that it is, and the texture that's there, and the people that are there, and that the people are going to be attracted to the site because of that. And so the minute we just ignore that and send everybody away, then we've shot ourselves in the foot anyway. So it not only makes, it's not only the right thing to do, but it also makes good business sense.
And it gives us an opportunity. There's been a lot in the newspaper recently about blight elimination. This will be, for the city of Baton Rouge, a true example of blight elimination, one of a huge site, but more importantly, to rid the existing area or contiguous area of blight, where we work collectively on that particular area. We have quite a number of absentee landlords who would it would be very beneficial to enforce code enforcement, to assure that those landlords are not only respectful of the new development, but are also protective of the residents who currently live in the blighted property that they own. So this could be, in my opinion, the example that we used to test where we need to go with code and blight enforcement.
Hi, thank you. It's been really interesting this morning, and it looks like y'all have done a lot to solve for many variables. On the environmental side, you talked a little bit about the economic sustainability, but given the history of this site, have you used any stormwater management practices? You look like you got some tax credits from the environmental side. How did you address that?
Yes, I mean, our approach is with everything, we kind of have a built-in sustainability to the approaches we take. We are fortunate in that a lot of the stormwater management on site is actually pretty good in the way that we're doing it. We have engaged, we actually have a landscape designer, Joey Fur Design, that's actually working with us to help work on that and do the study to make sure that we're being conscientious in the way that we approach that. And we are basically going to increase the pervious area on the site by a minimum of 25%, quite possibly 33%. So all those things are factored into the way that we're approaching the design, and will increase the quality of the place. And the other thing that we do is that, from the design on the interiors and things like that, we look at a lot of the non-glamorous pieces too, like air quality, low VOCs, things like that are nobody ever really knows about or sees, but they actually experience it in terms of having a higher, health factors and things like that. So,
Because of public input, your question in particular, that was also one of the requirements in the request for proposal, that they demonstrate how they would address those issues.
Giving Haley a workout.
No. I feel like Vanna.
Thank you, Vanna. Gwen, this is a question more for you than anybody else on the panel. This is an awesome project for Mid-City. Being a resident and a business owner in Mid-City, I'm super excited about it. The great thing about this is that you guys were given, donated the property from Entergy, but I'm thinking about other areas, not only in Mid-City, but throughout the city, where you have properties like the old dairy building on Florida, close to Breck's headquarters, and numerous other properties. Are you guys thinking about ways to take this as an example and figure out how, not maybe to make the property yours to redevelop it, but how to kind of help people that own those properties see the potential for the redevelopment in those without you having to do quite as much work?
We have great vision for exactly what you described. We started this talking about, this project started actually, John Spain, I believe 2011. This is now 2017. So it takes time to build the capacity to get these projects done, which is why the RDA is working feverishly to build its capacity so that we can take on other projects. The one that you mentioned is very near and dear to my heart. The next CEO will hear my piece on that particular one, and working to identify grants and funding opportunities so that we can use this same approach for those properties. There are many across our city. That we could, as a community, collectively decide how we pool our resources in a way to make them viable.
And let me jump in there. I don't have a mic. So I represent Borden, who owns that piece of property, and that piece of property on Florida Boulevard actually went up before condemnation a couple weeks ago, and they are out of town, and so I went to the hearing on that. And for those of you who go to a Metro Council meeting these days, the condemnation list has become very interesting, and the way that this community addresses condemnation is woefully inadequate. And like Gwen was talking about, we have to come up with a better way. At the Metro Council meeting about the Borden building, which I agree is one of my favorite buildings in town, it was a 4-hour-long meeting, which a lot of them are these days. But we come up with the fact that the city doesn't even have the money to tear it down, so we're condemning buildings, putting them on the condemnation list, which hurts their marketability. It's very hard to sell a building that's been on the condemnation list, and who knows what that does to the appraised value. And then you have, the city telling you that they don't even have the money to tear it down, so it's going to sit on that list for years and years, just becoming more and more dilapidated. And there are numerous commercial buildings on that, and I think, with so many of our Metro Council members here, that we really need to look at a new way of addressing commercial properties, because this building could have been, the Entergy site could have been the same thing if it had sat for another couple of years. It would have been on the condemnation list as well. And so Borden has actually said it's willing to donate its property. We've been talking to Lamont Cole, it's in his district, and numerous developers have come up since that meeting and said they'd be interested in doing it. And we need to identify the owners of those commercial buildings and tell them, look, you're not interested in it, here's the appraised value, would you be willing to donate that property to the RDA, or would you be willing to donate it to a church group that could use it for something, and really kind of grab some public dollars and have them really take this off their books. And they will be on the hook for environmental. Obviously, Entergy came back to the table after the donation when we had the environmental done, because they are on the hook, and they wanted to see that that work was done correctly and that it was done appropriately so that they wouldn't have environmental liability down the road. But some of these commercial buildings, I think, we need to start identifying as a community and giving those owners an out and saying, look, we'll take this, we'll revitalize it, redevelop it, and waive some of your fees or waive some of these things and just start taking an interest in that.
There are several of those type buildings, another dairy in particular, that are in North Baton Rouge that we are particularly interested in once the capacity of the RDA is built.
And just real quickly, I would add that it's incumbent upon all of us. It's not something that the RDA can take on by itself. I mean, it's too large of an issue in any city, but particularly in Baton Rouge. And so, what I would argue too is that in a lot of those cases, if you can cobble together a couple of folks that have a little bit of cash, or seriously, because it can be a good long-term investment, and that's essentially how my partner and I started, developing. Was we kind of found a building that we felt like would be good if we put it back into commerce. We put together a little bit of money and went and did it. And again, that's kind of what I'm seeing a lot of the people that are doing stuff in that whole Government Street corridor, is that's what's happening. And it may seem daunting at first, and certainly we are going to share all the resources that we have with the RDA and with whoever wants to, Justin, I'll talk to whoever comes to talk to me, but, we're happy to share all that information. I think it is, as a community, if we see it as a rising tide floats all ships, it really we'll see a much bigger impact in a much quicker time frame than if we're looking to one entity to solve all those issues.
Okay, concerning North Baton Rouge in particular, and I understand the footprint around the Entergy building. Now, how much of an expanse around the footprint, the initial footprint, that you see sort of bleeding into the neighborhood where Shiloh is, and Spain Street, and all those other streets, and the streets around it? How much of a specific role do you see the RDA and your group, Dyke, helping in areas like that? And in North Baton Rouge, we have more than several, but lots of blighted properties of similar ilk that could use, like the old Brown's Velvet at the corner of Plank and Choctaw. So beyond your normal footprint, what do you see for the residents around the Entergy building? And then for you, Gwen, beyond that in North Baton Rouge, what role do you see the RDA playing? And we have two more members of the council, Amanda, we're waiting for, so we can have a council meeting to discuss condemnations and regulations.
Yeah, absolutely, Rinaldi. The Entergy site, I think, serves as the model for the future development. We were very fortunate in this instance, one, because it was identified as a blighted piece of property owned, and then the Entergy company then donated it to the Redevelopment Authority. The site, as we've identified it, actually runs from the railroad track on the western side, North Boulevard on the northern side, Government Street on the south, and 22nd Street on the eastern boundary. So when we started, the approach was not just the 6-acre site, it included that entire area. And therefore, all partners became invested in the development, which we believe will accelerate the elimination of the blight in that entire geographic area. Those are the kinds of projects that we would like to see across the city of Baton Rouge.
And I agree with that wholeheartedly. I would say that our kind of, capture area is a little bit larger than that, kind of in the general vicinity, going, slightly further west than Shiloh and slightly further south than like the Lincoln Theater. With what we're looking at and trying to approach also both from the properties that are there's a small property that I was able to purchase on Eddie Robinson. I mean, there's, kind of looking at those smaller kind of projects is very important to this whole key. But the one thing that I would impress upon everyone, because we actually rode around with Lamont Cole and kind of looked through kind of some of the potential properties and things like that, is that everybody has to understand and be on the same page that it has to make financial, viable financial sense, and that you have to have property owners that are reasonable and understand what their property is actually worth currently, not what the future, because one thing I run into all the time is that, okay, well, there's going to be historic tax credits, there's going to be all these things, and it's worth more money. Well, it's not, because I've still got to take the risk of spending the money and putting the dollars out there and all those kind of things. And so it's a very tricky kind of road to traverse. And I think what you'll find is that most developers in Baton Rouge are more than willing to spend the dollars and to invest in things as long as they can feel reasonably sure that they'll get a return on that investment. It's very, otherwise you're not going to be able to get those kinds of investments. And I think that what we're fortunate in is that we're doing what I would call edge development, where the area that we're developing in is a highly distressed area. There's a lot of poverty in the general vicinity that we're dealing with, but we're able to kind of connect to the edges around there and kind of be able to provide a little bit more stability with what we're doing and the way that we're approaching it. And for us as developers, that's something that we see as a really viable approach, and that we may stretch our edge a little bit further than other developers may be comfortable with. But it is kind of something that we feel like that hopefully we'll be able to document this on the back end of it being successful, and be able to share that with everybody.
And one very important point, we've used these terms. We talk about blighted, we talk about condemnation, we talk about adjudicated. A blighted property is not necessarily adjudicated. So while we have worked out what we think is a very sophisticated and productive acquisition of adjudicated property, which has come to a screeching halt for legal reasons, because a property is blighted does not necessarily mean that it is adjudicated. So the owners of that blighted property have to be held accountable in a different manner. They pay their taxes, but maintain it as blighted, and it takes it into another legal area. The adjudicated property means that the city has taken, or through the sheriff's office, possession of the property, and if the taxes have not been paid through a certain period, then we can bring those into the land bank of the Redevelopment Authority and then pair them with partners who by contract tell us how they're going to bring that piece of adjudicated property back into commerce.
Thank you, guys.
So as usual, I have to step in. Thank you so much to our panelists. But before you clap, let me plug something. Tomorrow, so we've talked a lot about blight today. It's been one of the pervading problems in all of our communities. We hear this from North Louisiana down to the coast. Tomorrow at 3:05, Jerry Paffendorf is going to be speaking, and he's developed an app for blight control that they used in Detroit. So I would highly recommend that you attend. Some of our council people are meeting with him this afternoon to understand more about what he did. And speaking of council people, I saw someone else sneak in. Tara Wicker is over here from the East Baton Rouge City Council, so Metro Council, thank you. And there's also another person I'd like to personally recognize. When we did Plan Baton Rouge, as I talked about earlier, we had a group of, we said, leaders behind the scenes, and there was one particular leader who made so many things happen, and his name is Mark Drennan. And Mark, would you stand, please? We want to thank you. And he just happens to be the new president and CEO, I guess, or executive director of the Capital Area Finance Authority. So thanks, Mark, again for everything, and especially for sponsoring this today. And thanks to our panelists. Y'all were amazing. Really, thank you.